I remember the first time I heard a CEO speak. It was a board meeting. I just happened to be in it. And the CEO was, listening to everyone else kind of communicate and listening to the meeting go on. And one of the things I noticed about him was that he didn't speak right away. In fact, he didn't speak hardly at all until nearly halfway through the meeting. And then when he spoke with such clarity and such power and such, get this, brevity, that it just threw me off guard. It was like every single word he said had intention. I'd never heard anyone speak like that before. And it made a massive impression on me because ultimately, when he said just a few words, it went a long way. Now, I couldn't name it right away, not in the moment, but I knew there was something happening that was beyond just skill. It wasn't charisma. It was something more deliberate than that. It was something designed. Now, fast forward 10 years, and I've become a CEO myself. I've spoken at some of the most influential conferences in the world. And the organization that I founded, which I'll tell you a little bit more about when the video ends, is now operating in 27 countries, building some of the most effective leaders on the planet. Here's what I know to be true after all of that. The leaders who generate real authority when they speak aren't necessarily the most eloquent. They're not necessarily the loudest in the room. They're just doing something. They've learned something that most communicators never stop to examine. Now, if you clicked on this video, there's a really good chance that you already have a sense that your communication isn't carrying the weight that it should. Maybe someone on your team has said something about the way that you talk. Maybe you felt it yourself, that there's this constant gap between what you mean and then what people actually understand you to have said, what people actually receive. Well, today I want to make you a promise right now. By the end of this video, you're going to understand the core problems of modern communication. You're going to recognize the most common patterns that leaders repeat again and again and again, so often without even knowing it. And you'll walk away with a core sense of the communication principles that CEOs all over the world utilize to be more effective and more articulate. And you'll find out that every time you speak, it'll be an investment that compounds authority. That's what we're going to do today. Stay with me. So the first step, remove before you add. One of my favorite authors, Margaret Wheatley, said it best. She said, without reflection, we go blindly on our way, creating more unintended consequences and really failing to achieve anything useful. I love that because what that means for us is that before we talk about what to add in your communication, we have to understand what's already driving your communication. Because every time you speak, you're projecting, get this, a pattern. The words you choose, even the order you choose them in, are a direct expression of your emotions, your experiences, and your intentions. And the way that I can tell that someone is insecure and inauthentic is by the words they use. That's the number one tell. The average person uses roughly 5,000 words in active daily speech every single day. Think about each word as a color of paint, and your voice is the brush. And in reality, every room you walk into, every conversation you have, that conversation, that room, that's your canvas. And so the people who speak with authenticity and authority, they are very intentional about the canvas that they're painting. They understand what they're actually doing. They understand the effect they have on people, and they choose their colors carefully. The question is never whether you're painting something. The question is, what are you painting and why? Now, here's the core problem. Here's the big idea. Most people speak to be liked, not to be trusted. This is really, really important for you to understand. Because speaking to be liked is very reactive. It means that you're thinking about the moment. You're really trying to understand if the person across from you really likes you, if they're attracted to you, if they are sort of leaning in. And what it does is it kind of changes the way that you communicate because you're really focused more so on who the person is across from you and how they're reacting to you than the words you're actually saying. So how do you know that you're speaking to be liked? Well, there's a couple things that you'll do. You will over-explain. You'll soften your phrasing. You'll hedge your bets. You'll start managing how people feel about you as opposed to really focusing on communicating truth in a way that people around you can hear. There's a lot of sort of reactivity to being the kind of person that always wants to be liked when you're talking. And so you'll change everything about your phrasing and you'll come across far less confident. Now, here's what's unfortunate. People don't trust speakers who are trying to please them. They trust speakers who are willing to disappoint them. That's where trust is built. When you speak with a level of confidence, recognizing that you're telling the truth as opposed to trying to please people, suddenly people will trust you more, not less. Now, I don't know if you've ever done this before, but I've done this before. And it's one of the best examples of speaking to be liked as opposed to speaking to be trusted. I was traveling to England a couple of years ago, and I was sitting and talking in a coffee shop with one of Branch's leaders. And we were talking about his business and his life and that kind of stuff. And I don't know what happened, but halfway through the conversation, I found myself kind of changing my speech. Maybe you've done this before when you're talking to someone from a different part of the country or a different part of the world. I found myself actually sort of mimicking his British accent. And he would talk about like bloody this and bloke that and crumbs this and, that kind of stuff. And I found myself saying literally the exact same words. I found myself using a British accent at the end of my sentences. And I don't know why I caught myself, but as soon as I started doing it, I thought, what am I doing? I'm so thankful that I caught myself, or else it would have become a habit. But the truth is, for you and for me, that there are habits that we have to pay attention to. Here are 3 habits that weaken your communication. And if you can identify these patterns in yourself, then you are more than 50% of the way there. Let me give them to you. Habit number 1, over-explaining. What I mean by over-explaining is that you oftentimes will, communicate to the listener that you don't even trust what you are saying. You'll make a point, and then you'll make another point, and then you'll make another point to explain your first point. And before you know it, you're just making a bunch of points, and you're talking until you see their head nodding. That is a great sign that you're not very confident in what you're saying. Oftentimes, the people who are the strongest communicators, they know what they say and they say what they mean. And so when they speak, every sentence that they say makes a clear point and they can stop because they believe that they've been clear. You see, every sentence that you add after your point dilutes the actual point. Strong communicators, they make a statement and then honestly, they just let it stand. You'll find the very strongest communicators will actually make a statement, they'll let it stand, and then they'll just sit in the silence. And they don't need to over-explain. They don't need to explain anything more because they're like, I said what I said, and I know what I meant. And I'll say it again if you want me to repeat it, but I'm not going to say anything different because I know exactly what I meant. That level of confidence really comes from knowing what you're talking about, but then also believing that you're communicating in a clear enough way that the people across from you, they get what you mean. You don't have to explain it anymore. Habit number 2, soft framing. Now, I'll just give a quick caveat. This is soft framing only when you need to be authoritative. This is important. Now, soft framing is really about kind of hedging your bets and hedging what you're saying before you've actually even made your case. You'll start off a sentence with, well, I might be wrong, but it's just my opinion, but I don't think this makes any sense, but you'll start, sort of with these words that have very little to do with the strength of your case, and you're automatically making people think you don't know what you're talking about, and you probably think this is wrong. Now, if you really want to come across as authoritative, one of the things that you'll avoid is soft framing, because you can think of soft framing as like a preemptive apology. It's like saying, hey, I'm really sorry that I'm even in the room. I'm really sorry that I'm even talking. It's my turn to say something and I feel like I have to, and I'm going to say something. It's probably dumb. It's probably wrong. And you're basically training the room to not take you seriously. Everything that comes out of your mouth after soft framing is less authoritative than if you just hadn't said that soft framing phrase at all. Your frame sets the expectation. And when you frame things weakly, or you frame things with sort of indecision and insecurity, the room is going to receive it with weakness, and they're going to receive that feeling of insecurity. Soft framing destroys your authority over time. Now, let me give you a pro tip. For those of you who already have authority, there is a use for soft framing on the other side of authority. When you've already gained influence in the room, you already have momentum with people, you've already built trust, then soft framing sometimes can be useful. I've seen this used in a few different ways. One way would be, and this would be the wrong way if you have authority, to come out and just give your idea and say, hey, look, buddy, you need new tires. Or, hey, look, we need to go to Milwaukee. Just being very direct and very clear. But the way that you use soft framing as a person who already possesses authority is to say things like, an idea would be to get new tires. Or an idea would be to go to Milwaukee. You suggest things as opposed to coming across as already having decided things. And when you do that, you invite participation from your team. You allow people to criticize the idea without having to criticize you as the boss. And that oftentimes can really kind of create more conversation on the team, which of course is what you want. Habit number 3. Verbal clutter. Now, this one is my favorite because I hear it all the time. It's about filler words. It's repeated qualifiers. It's unnecessary transitions. This is what I mean. It's you saying, well, basically, or kind of, or you know what I mean, or like, or another one is great. Verbal clutter isn't just noise, it's distraction. It tells people that you're not precise. It tells people that you're not thinking about your words before you say them, that you're trying to fill the empty space between your sentences with something that just sort of makes it less awkward for people. But you got to understand, that clutter isn't just noise. It's where your credibility erodes. Every filler word charges interest against your authority, against your original idea. And so the best speakers, the ones that really communicate with confidence, they know that silence isn't awkward. Silence is power. The clutter comes from the fear of silence. Your ability to say a full sentence and then end with a period and allow there to be silence after you speak makes a huge difference in people's ability to take you seriously and perceive authority in the words that you use. Now, we just talked about the 3 habits. Now, before I give you the 4 communication principles of CEOs, the things that I've learned over the years and really kind of help you grow as someone who speaks with more confidence and conviction, I want to tell you a story. Now, I guarantee you that you have never heard this story, but I think this story is really going to help you understand a little bit more about what it means to communicate with confidence and communicate in a way that people around you respect, and it builds influence for you. It's about 2 people who came from Africa with almost nothing. They were both married, and their experience was unbelievably difficult. Not because they were immigrants to the United States and not because they were from Africa, but because these 2 people, man and woman, both married, they were deaf. They couldn't hear. So when they got to the United States, they couldn't talk to the mailman. They couldn't talk to the woman at the checkout counter. They couldn't talk to their pastor. They couldn't talk to hardly anybody without having to write things down on paper, without having to go through some really serious challenges to get people to even take them seriously. And for years, they struggled. It was really hard to communicate to people in the United States. And then, over time, things started to change. First, they had some kids. And like a lot of people would do, they use their kids to help interpret. Sometimes, they would go to parent-teacher conferences and the kid would actually interpret for the parents while they're in the middle of the parent-teacher conferences. Can you imagine how that would feel if you were interpreting for your teacher and your parent and they're talking about you in that moment? But that's what they had to do. And there were other instances where they would use their children to interpret. But over time, things got a little bit easier. And what they learned was the ability to communicate to people with confidence and clarity, even though they couldn't speak the language, how to command the room and demand that people pay attention to what they're saying, not because they're egotistical, but because they're a person and what they say matters, being more confident and more definitive about every word that they said, even if they're not speaking it at all. Now, what happened over the years, when they finally figured out how to actually communicate to people, their careers unlocked. And they both became professors at some of the largest universities in their community. And the woman in particular, she became the chairperson of the department. I mean, both of them had unbelievably stellar academic careers because they learned how to communicate with confidence and with authority. Now, here's why I bet you've never heard this story. Because the story is about my parents. I was the kid who interpreted for my parents at parent-teacher conferences. And I'm telling you, it was as awkward as you think it would be. Like, it was really strange. But looking back on it now, I realize that it was an important step in my parents' journey to really understand what it meant to communicate to people with confidence. And that's what I want for you. As we talk about these 4 core principles that CEOs use, you've got to understand that it's less about the words you say and more about the confidence and the conviction in which you say it. So here are the 4 communication principles of CEOs. Now, the very first one, principle number 1, is clarity over cleverness. I love this one because really, oftentimes when people lean into communication and they try to, be clear with people, oftentimes they just come across as clever. They're using fancy words they don't normally use, or they're using business jargon that makes no sense to the people around them. Like, for example, in academia, I'm finishing a doctorate in leadership. And one of the things that I've learned is that there's a difference between, and I'm going to use some jargon here, between canonical and non-canonical information. Canonical information is one thing, non-canonical information is another thing. I could say that to you and act like you should know it because it is the right word and it's the right phrase to describe what I'm talking about. Or I could just be clear and I can say, look, there's things that you learn through experience and then there's things that you learn through reading books. Exact same thing, but one is far more relevant to you and the other one is just trying to be clever, but it's far more confusing. The people who really communicate clearly, those are the ones who understand what the person in front of them actually understands. And then they use words specifically to come across as clear and not as smart or as clever. Here's the big idea. You've got to understand this. If your listener has to work to understand you, then you've already lost them. Here's how I understand this. Speaking with clarity is an act of respect. It's saying, I want you to participate in this conversation with me. I want you to get the main idea. It's not about me coming across as smart or me coming across as clever. I'm already confident in who I am as a communicator. I just need to help you understand the idea. It's an act of respect. It's an act of service. Principle number 2, fewer words, stronger sentences. Now, when I say fewer words, stronger sentences, what I mean is that the power of your words really comes down to your selection. Every word that you remove that doesn't carry weight makes the word that actually stay in your vocabulary, stay in your sentence, makes them carry even more weight. And so the way that you think about your phrasing, the way that you stop and edit what you say before you say it, makes a huge difference. Now, here's the key. In order to use fewer words and to have stronger sentences, you have to do one thing that a lot of people just don't do. You have to think before you talk. You actually literally, as you're saying, okay, there's something I have to say here next, you pause for a second and you think about what you actually want to say. You think about the right words to say. And if it looks like you're not talking, and if it looks like you're actually just pausing and thinking, that's okay. What it does is it communicates that you're a thoughtful person and every single word you use has power. You don't have to repeat yourself. You don't have to say things 4 or 5 times. You don't have to use a bunch of run-on sentences because you've thought about exactly what you want to say and you understand how to say it. And so you use fewer words, but then your sentences are by far the strongest that they could be. Here's what's going to happen over time. You're going to be known as someone who doesn't talk a lot, who doesn't say a ton of things. But when you do, every word has power. And there's a key here. Brevity. Brevity is not about being short. It's not about saying fewer words. It's about being more precise. It's about communicating that you believe that your words have power. And so you'll be perceived as someone who might not talk as much, but when you do, every single sentence packs a punch. That's what you want to communicate with authority and confidence. Here's the third one. Principle number 3, speaking from decisions, not from possibilities. Now, this is one that leaders all over the world oftentimes miss. I've seen people do this really well, and then I've seen people do this really, really poorly. When you speak, you want to speak from decisions more often than you speak from possibilities. When you speak from possibilities, what you're saying is, look, we might think about, or this could be a potential option, or here are some things that we might consider, versus here's what we're doing. One sounds like a leader that's exploring their options. The other one just frankly sounds like a leader. Oftentimes when you're speaking from decisions, what you're doing is you're helping to frame the conversation. You're saying, here's what we're doing today. Today we are here to decide, or the purpose of this meeting is to, or we're trying to accomplish this thing. When you speak from decisions and not possibilities, what you're doing is you're giving your team a gift. You're not being inflexible. You're carrying conviction into the conversation, and that conviction is contagious. All right, principle number 4, and this one is by far my favorite. Silence as a leadership tool. Now, the truth is most people feel silence because they're uncomfortable, but leaders use silence because they're confident. They pause after a significant statement. They give people an opportunity in the room to absorb what they're actually saying. They let the sentence stand on its own. They use space between their sentences to punctuate what they're trying to say. And so everything they say carries more weight. There was a CEO that I had years ago that did this for me. It was an unbelievable experience. I'd never felt anything like this before. Years ago, I was working for a guy who was a great leader, and he'd asked me to do something that was really convicting and really challenging. And it was honestly beyond anything he'd ever asked me to do before. And so I got started and I started working on it, and I got close to the deadline and realized that I was going to have to put an extra effort to get this done, more than I'd ever had to do before. And so I, sent him a text message and just said, hey, I don't think I'm going to be able to get this thing done in the time frame that you'd like me to get it done in. Just giving him a heads up. Can I get this done on Monday? His text back to me changed my perception of communication. He texted me back and he said, Dan, I'm speechless. And that was it. And that was it. Just 3 words. Dan, I'm speechless. And then he didn't say anything else. He didn't text me back for an hour or so. And I just looked at it. And the longer I looked at it, the more nervous I got. He just allowed those 3 words and then the silence after those 3 words to carry tremendous weight. Dan, I'm speechless. In that phrase, he communicated his surprise that I wasn't able to get it done, his disappointment that I didn't reach his expectations for me, but then also it created a sense of urgency in me. And honestly, what I did is I went back and I did the thing. I figured out how to get it done. I went in and put the extra effort into it because I realized that his standards were higher than my own standards for myself. And the truth is, what he did was he communicated that silence with just a few quick words and then a lot of silence can speak volumes. And that's what you want. You want to be able to allow silence to make a huge difference in your communication. And it starts by you being confident in silence. All right, so we've named the problems and now we've established the principles. Now let's talk about what you actually can do, starting with the very next time you open your mouth. There's a couple things that you can do that will really make a big difference. And here is one thing right now. One habit to remove: replacing filler words with a pause. Here's what I mean. The next time you feel the urge to say or like or stop. Just breathe and then continue. It's going to feel uncomfortable at first, absolutely. But the discomfort, it's all about discipline. It's your ability to say, okay, the pause right now is important. And I'm not going to fill it with I'm not going to fill it with The pause is going to become your signature over time. And it's going to become the moment that the room leans in. The pause makes a difference. Just try it. The second thing I want to leave you with is how to structure your answers in a meeting. Here's one thing that I've seen work unbelievably well. You start with your conclusion, not your journey. You give your answer first, and then you give the context second. Here's a helpful 3-part structure. You give your position, then your reason, then the implication. You say, here's what I think, and then here's 2 reasons why I think it, and then here's what I think it's going to do for us as an organization. The reason why this is so important is because it helps you avoid narrating your thinking in real time. You process first, and then you speak second. What you're doing is you're saying, look, here's what I think. I don't think we should do this. Here's 2 reasons why. And here's what's going to happen to our organization because of these decisions. That sense of clarity helps everybody understand that you've already processed and packaged your thinking, and it gives you that much more confidence every time you speak. The first 2 examples that I gave you were all about, first, number 1, the pause, right? Recognizing the power of silence. And the second one is how to communicate clear in a meeting, how to frame your conversation before you start talking. All those are important. But the next tip I'm going to give you, the thing that is so important for you to understand right now, is how the best leaders say less and mean more. If you've ever been in a conversation with somebody who just goes on and on and on, they talk for 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes about a bunch of different things, and you're not exactly sure what they're saying, and then you meet someone who can speak in just a minute and a half, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and be unbelievably clear, you know exactly the power I'm talking about right now. It is 100% possible for a leader to say less and mean more. And I'm going to tell you this, not because I love history, which I do, but because this is absolutely relevant for you. This is during the height of the Civil War in the mid-1800s. And here's the scene. It's a dedication of a soldiers' national cemetery at Gettysburg. And there are 17,000 soldiers buried in the ground. There's families from all over the country that have come simply because they had nowhere else to put their grief. The headliner for the day was a guy named Edward Everett. Now, he's a former senator. He's former Secretary of State. He's the greatest public orator in America at the time. And he stood up. People were excited that he was there. He spoke for 2 stinking hours. And then Abraham Lincoln stood up. Abraham Lincoln spoke 272 words, literally less than 3 minutes. The very next morning, Edward Everett wrote Abraham Lincoln a letter. And in it, he said Edward Everett wished he could have claimed to gotten as close to the central idea of the occasion, the reason why the war was fought, in 2 hours as Lincoln had in just 2 minutes. The greatest orator in the entire country was conceding in writing that Lincoln was better in 2 minutes than he had been in 2 hours. Now, how did Lincoln actually do it? Well, here's the key: preparation. Oftentimes people think that Lincoln actually wrote the Gettysburg Address while he was on the train on the way to Gettysburg. That is not true at all. He had been working on that speech for years. To be able to stand up after somebody gives a 2-hour speech and then give a 2-minute speech knowing that you are going to nail it, well, that takes unbelievable confidence that only comes from preparation. And Lincoln didn't speak briefly because he only had a little bit to say. He spoke briefly because he had a standard. Every word had carried the weight it needed to carry. And if a word didn't belong, it wasn't in the speech. That's not just a communication technique. That's a disciplined decision that was made long before he ever stood up in front of the country. And it's exactly the principle that we've been building towards this entire conversation. All right, at the beginning of this video, I told you I'd share more about the organization that I co-founded. Well, Branches is one of the most important passions of my life. I love the work that we do. And as I was building Branches, I learned a lot about communication. Here's the key. I had to travel all over the world. I got to travel all over the world to recruit people to join our cause, to help us build this company, to help make this nonprofit an absolutely incredible impact on the world. But the thing that I learned as I was traveling all over the world, to Thailand and to Uganda and to Costa Rica, is that there's a particular technique that you can use to communicate to people all over the globe. It starts with authenticity. It ends with confidence. And in the middle is unbelievable empathy. I've learned that in order to really kind of communicate to people and help them understand more about who you are and what you're trying to do in the world, you've got to be genuine, but you have to be firm. You have to be clear. You have to understand what you're doing and why. And you have to look them in the eye and tell them with confidence that you believe you are doing something that's worthwhile and important, and they should join in too. Branches is now operating in 27 countries all over the globe, and we're working with some of the best entrepreneurs, executives, and CEOs, helping them build businesses that are designed to benefit their communities. And we're teaching them how to communicate with confidence in a way that builds influence, builds their company, and changes their communities. And I love the work we do, and it's all anchored in clear communication. So the next time you speak, and it can be the very next time you speak, I want you to remember this. You're not just filling the air. You're painting a picture. The goal is not just to say more. The goal is to say it better, to say it cleaner, to paint something that stays on the wall long after you left the room.